Hello, and thank you so much for joining me. My name is Madelyn, and today I will be sharing my research on approaches to children's nonfiction picture books on climate change. Climate change is undeniably important. As one of the biggest issues facing the world today, it's important for children to be learning about. But I wanted to know how we are teaching children about it, specifically through picture books. First, I read literature on environmental education and picture books to inform my approach. Then, I selected 10 books and analyzed them, grouping based on themes and general approaches. And finally, I organized major findings in the approaches and affordances I noticed. 4 things stood out in my research on nonfiction picture books. First, all picture books have synergy between pictures and text, making the book's message reliant on both. Nonfiction picture books are also engaging and can inspire children, but also provide information to help students learn about a topic. One potential downside is a trend of fictionalization that can occur in nonfiction texts, where the facts can become distorted. However, these books also give children experience in retrieving information, an important academic skill. When teaching about topics like climate change, there are some things educators should include and avoid. Children want to understand what is being done about climate change by adults, but they also want to be empowered with reasonable actions that they can take to also engage in this issue. It's also important for climate change education to be realistic but age appropriate and avoid oversimplifying ideas without putting too much pressure on students to do everything. The 10 books I selected had a variety of approaches, but had to fit the criteria of picture books and teach about climate change in some way. Generally, these books could be divided into 3 groups. The narrative books clearly followed a story which climate change fit into in some way, though not necessarily explicitly. The reference categories books had detailed information and used facts and anecdotes and exciting spreads to convey information. Some books achieved a balance of both and seemed to teach about climate change as the story. While the narrative books didn't provide as much information about climate change, they engaged children in the issue by providing an emotional connection. On the flip side, the reference texts go into much more depth about the issue, allowing children to understand the importance and relevance of the issue. But at the same time, they might decontextualize the issue by making it seem like something that doesn't impact them personally. There were also some inaccuracies present, including an oversimplification of how climate change works and can be addressed. However, the main issue was a trend to suggest that climate change is relatively simple to fix, even though it's a serious issue. So it can be basically fixed by individuals' collective commitment to things like recycling and driving less. While this positive outlook is good and those actions are important and relevant to this conversation, it ignores the major contributions of governments and corporations and their responsibility to fix climate change. This neglect is particularly problematic not only because it is inaccurate, but it also ends up putting too much pressure on children to fix climate change. This was evident in many of the narrative texts where adults were absent or depicted as being disinterested, and then as well in the reference texts where adults generally just weren't mentioned. Children, however, were told that they had the power to address climate change, and in combination with these stories of the severity and impact of climate change, this ends up placing too much responsibility on readers to address it. So, while none of the books fully addressed all of the recommendations for good environmental education, each offered a different way of approaching the topic with children. Though many of the books did struggle with a balance between empowering readers and putting undue pressure on them to somehow solve climate change, educators' awareness of these limitations and their strengths could support effective use. It would be beneficial to also work with children and their teachers to understand what they perceive the strengths and weaknesses of these texts to be in future studies, as well as how these texts might fit within curriculum to be used as tools within the classroom. Thanks so much for listening.